Well, hello everyone and welcome. So today we are going to be discussing The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and in particular chapter 6, which focuses on why social media tends to harm girls more than boys. Now, Haidt argues that girls are more vulnerable to social media's negative effects due to factors like relational aggression, social comparison, and feedback-seeking behaviors. So I want to start off by reading a quote from page 146. On most phototypical platforms like Instagram, users post content about themselves and then wait for the judgments and comments of others. So I thought, why do kids do that? And then wait, I think we do that too. And I think a part of it is just human nature. We want to be seen, we want to be accepted, we want to be loved. But when we think about it, we're getting our validation from what others say about us on social media. And that can be tough. Think about when we were growing up, we would spend time with friends and they got to know the full us, the real us, because we're spending real time with them. And we learned in our social groups what was acceptable and what wasn't because we were given immediate feedback. Well, today we post something online, which is only a microcosm of our lives, only a microcosm of our kids' lives. And then we allow others input on a picture to dictate how we feel about ourselves. So let me tell you a quick story. We were having snack one day, and I taught fourth grade my entire 30-year career. And two girls were talking. They're fourth grade. They're, 9 and 10 years old. And the one girl says to the other, "I can't wait to get home so I can check my Insta to see how many hearts I got." And the other girl goes, "Well, you shouldn't be on Insta. You're too young." But that, when 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds are already learning that my value, my validation, my worth is based on what other people say, how many hearts I'm getting. Now, further down on page 146, and he discusses this really through page 148, is the link that heavy social media use impacts girls' mental health. Now, he talked about, well, is there a possibility that depression causes girls to gravitate towards social media? And he said, no, not really, because when you look at some of the studies, so there are some studies that would say, well, there's no link. Yeah, but those links looked at all digital technology and all teens. But when you zoomed in, when you dove down deep and looked at only social media use and only girls, he says that, yeah, social media use is a cause for anxiety, depression, and other ailments. Now, he talks on page 108 how social media isn't like sugar, affecting only the person who consumes it. So when kids started carrying smartphones around in school, students talk less in the hallways, less at lunch, less at recess, because they were busy checking their phones and getting caught up in the latest drama for the day. So there was less eye contact, less laughter, and less conversations. And he says on the top of page 149, and I'm going to read it here, he says that social media therefore harmed the social lives of even students who stayed away from it. Now, this reminded me of someone who said to me, well, this is why I have to be on social media so that I don't miss out on anything. Because the ones that aren't using it, they're still being impacted because of how kids are relating to each other, which isn't a face-to-face, it's more through devices. And something else that he discusses in this first part of the chapter is how kids are spending time online. So he said that boys are spending time on video-based platforms like YouTube and also text-based platforms like Reddit and multiplayer online games, whereas girls are heavier users of the visually oriented platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, and Tumblr. And so depending on your kids, you need to stay up to date on various platforms and varying modes of delivery of information and material. So one more thing that I just want to talk about before we get into, he discusses 4 reasons why girls are more vulnerable to social media harms than boys. And he talks on page 154 about agency and communion. Now, agency is when we strive to be an individual, and communion is striving to integrate ourselves into a larger social circle. So he found that in general, boys are more focused on agency and girls are more focused on communion. Now, you could argue that, that's not true in every case, and I agree with that. But what matters most is that tech companies know these differences and use them to hook their core audience. All right, so let's go into his 4 reasons why girls are particularly vulnerable to social media. So his first reason is on page 153 says girls are more affected by visual social comparison and perfectionism. And we know that like a girl's social standing, he talks about how it's closely tied to her beauty and sex appeal more so than it is on boys. And he says that on page 154. And we think about it when we were growing up, we are exposed, like to say as adult women, we were exposed to airbrushed and photoshopped models, but that wasn't our competition. Our competition is our own peer group. But now girls are able to put filters on and have editing apps to improve everything about them. And he has this chart where he talks about how satisfied boys and girls are with themselves. And the chart started from 1990 to 2019. They found that there was a serious plunge in how people felt about themselves after 2011 because of social media. And girls are finding or believing that they're not measuring up to these unattainable standards. And I have a friend, he told me a story. He was going overseas. There were 4 girls, so he lives in America, and there were 4 girls on the plane. And he noticed them just because there was not really an adult. He said maybe they were like 16, 17 years old. And he said they, where they landed and wherever it was over in Asia. And he went on his trip and he said when he came back to fly back to America, the same 4 girls were on his plane going back to America. And he said was the interesting thing was all of these girls looked different. One had lip enhancement. One looked like something was done with her eyes. He said one definitely had breast augmentation. Another one looked like she had something done to her bottom. And I thought, my gosh, here are these girls viewing things saying, well, you're not good enough. You're this standard of perfection. You're not meeting it. So you need to alter yourself in some way. And they're not just doing it with filters or editing apps. Now they're actually having surgery to meet these standards. And I thought it was interesting. It was on page, I'm going to find it. Okay, it's page 157. They said when girls were exposed to images of very thin women, they became more anxious about their own appearance. But here was the thing that was interesting. It said that these images are flashed on the screen for just 20 milliseconds, which is too fast for the women to become consciously aware that they had seen them. So this means that social comparison is taking place outside of awareness, and it actually affects how we feel about ourselves. So when we say to girls, oh, well, social media is just highlight reels, but the part of the brain that's doing the comparison is not governed by the part of the brain that knows consciously that they're seeing these edited, curated pictures. So when it happens outside of that, no wonder that girls are feeling anxious and leading to depression and worse, because they're not even realizing that they're seeing these images that are telling them that they're not enough. And when they're constantly being fed this, it's like, no wonder they're anxious, no wonder they're depressed. And the best thing to do is to spend less time on the platforms. All right, so let's go to number 2, his second reason why, why girls are particularly vulnerable to social media. And his second reason is girls' aggression is more relational. And this is on page 158. Girl aggression is seen in trying to harm the relationships and reputation of others' girls. So there's gossiping and spreading rumors, trying to turn friends against the girl, lowering her perceived value as a friend with peers. And this leads to anxiety, depression, and even suicide. And Haidt says on page 158 that, I'm going to read it to you directly, for depressed or ostracized teens, physical death offers the end of pain, whereas social death is a living hell. And then we have bullying. So bullying, they found that with the onset of social media, that the cyberbullying actually didn't increase. But what happened was how the cyberbullying occurred, because now it can happen across many platforms. So you can join these platforms and then you can spread real rumors or mount attacks. And the thing is anyone of any age can set up multiple anonymous profiles, which can be used for trolling and reputational destruction. So when you think about that, the bullies go with them anywhere. They're going with them to school, they go with them into the bathroom, and they go with them into their bedroom. And because everything can go online, girls are worried about a misstep that could go viral. So adolescence has gone from discover mode toward defend mode, defend their reputation, defend their social status. How sad is that the kids have no time to be a kid? When you think about it, being a kid is hard enough, and being a teen, my gosh, I am so glad that I am not growing up in this time where social media can allow everyone to see every shortcoming. They said on page 160 that many suicides of young girls have been directly linked to bullying and shaming on social media platforms, including Ask.fm and NGL, not gonna lie, which encourage users to anonymously broadcast their thoughts about other people. Now, we know as adults that it's not appropriate to say unkind things to someone's face. But kids today, because they're living online and they actually never get to see that interaction when they're trashing someone else, they're not learning the impacts of their words and their actions because they do all the damage while hiding behind a screen. All right, so let's go to the third reason why girls are particularly vulnerable to social media, and that is on page 160. And it's girls more easily share emotions and disorders. So he was talking on page 161 about how friends can affect our mood, but so can friends, and even their friends. They're like, I'm doing some type of like comedy here now. So happiness is contagious, which is great, and it spreads through social networks. But even more than happiness, depression is more contagious than happiness or good mental health. And here's the twist. Depression is spread from women. So a woman who is depressed, she increases her odds of her friends, male and female, of becoming depressed by 142. And this is because women are better expressing emotions and are more effective at communicating mood. And, you hear that saying, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, or happy wife, happy life. I'm not saying that, I agree with it necessarily, but because we are more expressive in our emotions, we can impact those around us. So there was a jump in depression in 2012 because girls were sharing their feelings on Instagram and other platforms. And on page 162, they talk about how girls are more vulnerable to sociogenic illnesses caused by social influences rather than biological ones. So, for example, they talked about on page 163, 164 about Tourette's. And they said Tourette's is actually mostly a male disease. But once Tourette's became popular on social media, girls were actually exhibiting Tourette's. They also found that influencers portraying multiple personality disorders were getting loads of followers on TikTok And then doctors were seeing more incidences of people saying that they have multiple personality disorders. So the best advice doctors are saying is to stay off social media. I mean, that makes sense, right? All right, so let's go to the fourth reason, which are that girls are particularly vulnerable to social media. And it is girls are more subject to predation and harassment. Predation is, predators. So one of the things that they found is girls want friends. They want followers, they want likes. So they are more likely to friend someone back without actually knowing who they are. And they talk on page 167 how if a boy in school asks for a girl to send a nude, they're mocked or teased if a girl doesn't do that. And what the boys are doing is selling them to their high school friends that are boys in exchange for alcohol. And this one girl said, well, when a boy sends a nude, people laugh. When a girl sends one, then she's a slut. And what they found was it is actually easier for men to stalk girls and have little accountability when it's done online. And to finish up the chapter on page 168, the subtitle is quantity over quality. And they were talking about the quantity of social connections is greater, but the quality has not increased. But here's the thing, for girls, quality trumps quantity all day, every day. And for us, it's better if we can have a few close friends than all of these followers and social friends that really aren't connected to us in real life. And he says on page 170, he said, here's the irony, the great irony of social media. The more you immerse yourself in it, the more lonely and depressed you become. All right, so that's my thoughts and my take on chapter 6 of Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. So thanks for joining me. I look forward to going through Anxious Generation chapter 7 with you next time, and it's titled, What's Happening to Boys? So be sure to have a conversation with someone this week. Till the next time.